Hi everyone, this is Dr. Satish Munnolli, librarian speaking from Advanced Center for Treatment, Research and Education in Cancer, and also I'm an officer in charge of the scope cell in Navi Mumbai. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizing team of LIS Academy under the great leadership of Professor P.V. Konnu, President LIS Academy Bangalore, and the entire team at the VTU under the able leadership of Professor Karsidappa, Vice Chancellor VTU Belgavi, for providing me an opportunity to share my thoughts on open scholarship and libraries at this fourth annual event LISACON 2021, which is being organized at VTU Belgavi. Under the sub-theme Open Science and Ethical Issues, I am just going to present my thoughts on ethical challenges in open science researchers' perspective. As you are all aware that open science has opened up plenty of avenues or opportunities for many, and also one has to be a bit very careful while just dealing with the open science. How it is just going to be helpful, at the same time it is also having a dangerous elements while just dealing with any science which is open to the world. So at this thing in the outline, I'm just going to cover upon this morality and ethics in research, and changing models and dimensions of various scholarly communications, and what are the various challenges in research, and what to do and what not to do, and various phases of a researcher from the student life to a mentor status, and also the responsibility of researchers in the publishing environment, as well as for supervising the students, as well as in the evaluating process, as well as whenever they're in the high-end committees in the funding agencies, what is his role and responsibilities. I'm just going to sum up the entire presentation in these areas. Coming to this morality and ethics. Morality and ethics are used interchangeably, and morality is the foundation based on which the ethics is built upon. Inculcating the standard methods and practices in research is one of the, what I can say, basic pillar of this entire research ethics. And basically it is again the ability of an individual to identify what is right and what is wrong. So these are the basic pillars of any researcher in this entire research environment. And coming to this changing models of scholarly communication, if you look at the publication history, since the invention of the publication of the first ever scientific journal in 1665, it is over more than 3 decades. Till 2000 or so, the publications in scientific scholarly communications were coming in the print and print media only. But later, or in the beginning of this 2000 onwards, the publication started coming in various different online formats as well as a digital format. And also it has totally changed the dimension. If you look at the publications which came as articles or conference papers or book chapters, reviews and notes and editorial or letters, erratum, and all these, they were just all born digitally, but later they converted in the born in the print version, and later they converted in the digital format. But slowly in the after the initiation of that open access initiative in the Budapest in 2002 onwards, that open science concept has just evolved like anything. And after the evolvement of that open science concept or open access concept, several different areas also have just opened up their wings in case of this science, whether it is a science publication or even science experimenting, and every element of this scientific scenario, whether it is related to the publishing an article in a journal, or whether it is an evaluation platform, or whether it is a open source software, or whether it is an educational resources, or whether it is an open data, and whether it is a science infrastructure. In almost all the spheres of this science environment, this open concept has just opened up plenty of opportunity for most of the scientific community, which is having what I said earlier also, I would mention again, It has plus points, advantages as well as disadvantages also. So this evolvement of open science has opened up plenty of avenues and opportunities for many in many angles. Uh, if you look at this open science, or when you just come up to this ethics in research, in a researcher's what I can say career or life cycle or research cycle, the idea just are just what I can say brought into the conceptual mode, and then uh, whenever before the starting of that experiment or even going for research studies, ideas just are evolved or even thought of, and also based on the ideas the literatures are surveyed, and also again the data is captured from various resources, or even they are just captured from the laboratory experiments, or even by the human studies or survey methods, and also manuscript writing, or when once the entire research report is ready in hand, identifying the journal for publishing is another what you can say stage, wherein the researcher has to just identify the suitable journal for publishing the research, and also identifying the conferences for developing the collaborations, or even just sharing the new ideas, and also having meetings with the peers or even the experts. And these are various stages of a researcher while just doing the research, and each and every phase of this research cycle, uh, a high standard of ethics should be followed, and wherein when the contents or science is available in the open platform, a kind of what I can say investigator mind should be there in the researcher, so that to identify the accuracy or the authenticity of the source, or whether it's an open source or whether it's a scientific content. You should be able to identify all these very small elements before just taking up the decisions in the entire research cycle. uh, there are so many challenges a researcher will face, and I have just jotted down some of the points wherein what to do and what not to do, kind of a points I have just mentioned. And in case of this data collection, it is a mandate or a kind of a practice, good practice or standard practice to take the consent of the especially in case of the patient's studies. It is a mandatory for getting the consent from the patients before collecting the data. So it's a kind of a standard practice, so you just cannot avoid. So whether in case of this permission of the data usage, also seeking the permission to use the data is a kind of a standard practice one has to follow, and using the data without a permission is not a good practice. And the presentation of the data, so presenting the output as it is and analyzing as per the standard practices is a good practice, rather than fabricating the data outcome to suit the objectives of the studies. And again, image presentations. In case of biological sciences or health sciences, many of the images are just derived or just taken out from the microscopes or electronic microscopes, or very what I can say from the operational theaters. So whenever the data or such kind of images are being used, they should be used as it is, rather than manipulating to suit the desired results. So authorship in publication is also another vital important element, wherein uh, the every individual who contributed in science or research should be just very much given a credit, while just giving the authorship, rather than using some influential researchers or senior researchers adding their name in publishing. The science is not a great or good practice. And citing the publications, citing the source with a complete reference, or copying the ideas. One should normally cite the source in a proper way, rather than copying the ideas and the text as it is, as if it is its own. In that way, it should not be. And coming to this use of copyright content, receiving the consent before the use of the copyright content from the originator is a kind of a standard practice, wherein without acknowledging the what you can say, the source, it is not a good practice. Information about the safety substances. Many of the chemical experiments are just being done using many chemicals, and in the paper also reasonably it's a good practice to have a kind of a safety data sheets or all the safety measures to be followed in the entire experiments, or even otherwise should be made a kind of a standard practice while just doing the research. So non-disclosure of safety procedures in any of the outcome of the research also is not a great practice. Submission of a paper for publication. So whenever the research is just giving some results, it should be submitted to a kind of a single publisher rather than submitting the same paper to multi-publisher. Uh, Submitting a same draft to multi-publisher is not a good practice. And conflict of interest, proper declaration of the conflict of interest should be there in each and every paper. And protection of, and especially this conflict of interest is more and more in uh, biological sciences and health science kind of a publications. Protection of human subjects, permission from National Institutional Ethics Committee and Institutional Ethics Committee, and the patient consent. These are the common practices or good common practices which are being followed, and also they are the mandatory in almost all the what I can say studies of the human subjects. And even the laboratory animals, whenever the laboratories are animals are just used in the laboratories for the scientific research purpose or studies, there are some animal ethics committees or institutional ethics committees wherein a permission is very much required to just to get the approvals before going for the experiments of any animals or on the human studies. So these are some of the standard practices wherein I would not say these are the very great challenges, but what is good and what is not good. A researcher should be able to identify or differentiate between what is a good practice and what is a bad practice. So these are some of the points what I had just would like to share. And coming to these phases of a researcher, any researcher for that matter, from the student life to a mentor, he will have a kind of a span of 30 to 35 years space. So a research student will have a kind of what I can say in the initial period he will have a bit what I can say he is in the developing stage or kind of going to be a researcher in the future. As a student, he has a kind of what I can say curiosity to learn many things, as well as he has to just what I can say understand new techniques and new methods, as well as he should just go as per the guidance of the seniors who are just working in the laboratories. So this is one crucial stage wherein they just try to make not many mistakes by using some wrong methods or shortcut methods. So all these needs to be just curtailed in the beginning only, so that kind of a he can person a student can just make a career, a good career in the research environment. So over a period of time he just can become a research associate or a scientist, and then over a period of time again he will just become an investigator or a senior teacher. And then after maybe around 15 years or so he can just start guiding the students, and also he will have an additional responsibility of reviewing the papers whenever he just receives the paper from various publishing bodies or even the collaborators or colleagues. And also mentor is one of the highest what I can say level a researcher can go up to the level, or he can just go in the level of the head of the institute or in the senior most position, wherein he can just get a good recognition because of his contributions. And most of the times all these in the entire all these phases from student to the that mentor, they will have a different roles and responsibilities in each and every phase. So in the next few slides I'm just going to share some of the responsibilities of a researchers in various this science environment. So in case of this publishing, Good publishing practices one should follow, whether especially the students or even the mid-career researchers should never go for shortcut ways for publishing their research reports. Normally, they should just adopt some good publishing practices by identifying the right source for publishing or a right journal by just identifying and searching the journals in various journal finder or identifying some important reputed indexing sources of journals wherein they can identify the right source for publishing their research. Since this open science concept has evolved, many of the dubious or predatory journals have been evolved. So it is a kind of a responsibility of a researcher to the students, or even otherwise for himself also. They should reasonably analyze and evaluate before submitting any draft or manuscript to any journal for publishing. Identifying the authentic journal and also identifying the right source for identifying the metric sources for evaluating the journals, and right way of interpreting the, what do you say, metrics or even the impact factors. So these are some of the very basic tools, techniques the researchers should be always have an idea or understand the entire what I can say, the process of publishing in science environment. Then coming to the criteria of authorship. So as it has been mentioned earlier also, the researcher should be transparent enough in identifying or even mentioning all the authors who have really contributed in the author byline in the publication. And before submitting any draft to any publication, a plagiarism check should be made to avoid any kind of duplication or even kind of what you can say, uh, cut and paste should not be the kind of a method for submitting any publication draft to the publishers. And also all these practices can just avoid the duplications. And also acknowledging the funding agency is also one of the important aspect every researcher has to just practice while publishing. And researchers as a supervisor. So in the student community or as a researcher, he will have a certain what do you say, the responsibilities. And in case of supervising also, uh, he has a responsibility like right interpretation of the data by using the right techniques or even the right formulas. So and also the data should not be interpreted or in a wrong way, or it should be interpreted in the using the right methods. And the prior approval of the projects involving the animal studies also is one of the responsibility of the researchers to take the research in forward direction. And registration in the under the clinical trials, as I just mentioned. So this is also one of the important what I can say element of a supervisor to understand various institutional policies or animal ethics policies, or even the committee's involvement or even the prior approval of any of such animal studies or human studies are very much required before taking up any research project in the forward direction. So these are some of the responsibilities of researchers whenever any researcher is supervising the students. So coming to in evaluation, a researcher, when he goes to a kind of a mid level, after say around 10 to 15 years of experience, he start receiving the papers for reviewing purpose. So identifying the authenticity of the publishers before the acceptance of the review is also one of the important what I can say, the factor the researcher has to just develop that ability or skill for taking up the reviewing responsibilities. Because as I just mentioned, there are plenty of predatory and dubious journals are just getting published in the online environment wherein they are just coming out with the open access model. So the scientific community also should have a kind of ability to identify the authenticity of such publishers, what is right and what is wrong. And reputation and publishing history is also one of the another criteria wherein they can just reasonably what you can say understand and identify what is a proper or established publishing body or even otherwise. And journal, whether the journal is listed in established indexing resources is also one of the another resource wherein they can just identify whether the journal is genuine or fake journal. And identifying the open access policies, whether the publisher is publishing charging the article processing charges is also another what you can say area wherein they can just identify about the what you can say reputed journal or journal with the authenticity or it's a fake journal. And even having or identifying the contact details of the publishers on the journal page is also another what you can say way of identifying the authentic source. So these are some of the areas. In the case of with my experience, many of the researchers, even in the senior level, they are just receiving several communications from various publishing bodies for reviewing the papers or being a kind of in the editorial bodies. So many times in our health science and clinical science, I receive a kind of calls and mails from our colleague scientists and clinicians to evaluate the authenticity of the publishers of such communications. So these are some of the techniques wherein the librarians can very much play a very vital role in evaluating the resources and also briefing the details to the researchers and clinicians, wherein they can just take up the responsibility in a very responsible way, rather than just falling a prey to a kind of a predatory journals by accepting and later repenting is not really a good outcome in the entire process. So as I just mentioned, when a researcher is going in high up in the ladder, uh, when he just after say around 20-25 years or even 30 years, when he just go in the senior most level, definitely he will have a kind of a expertise in a particular domain, and he will be there in the high end committees, whether it is academic committees or evaluation committees or funding committees. So he will be part of that those committees, and the person who is there in such committees also will have a huge responsibilities for funding the projects. And whenever a researcher is joining such committees, he should be very judicious in evaluating the research proposals, rather than just going in a bias, taking a biased decisions. So normally in case of a corporate social responsibilities or partnership with the public health community proposals, they just expect some kind of a favors for coming out with research results which are favoring them or favor their interest. So all such kind of what do you say? The researchers should be more transparent and also judicious in taking a decision while just sanctioning the funds, because most of the funds are just given by the government agencies. And of course, there are some cases wherein the pharma industries are also coming forward in funding the research in the pharma industry. So there they have a lot of interest of their business. So the persons who or researchers who are there in such committees should be transparent and judicious before taking any decisions. So research, and also one of the other way is just publishing research in a peer-reviewed or open access journals from the outcome of that funded research is also should be emphasized. So these are some of the responsibilities. And before just coming to the conclusion, I would like to just mention a kind of instance. It's the actual what I can say fact, wherein one of the students, senior student, I would say, uh, he has completed his research and completed his thesis writing also, and also simultaneously he has published a couple of papers in internationally known reputed journals. But of course, he was not associated with the universities under which he had just submitted his or registered his research title. He was just working with one government organization, and also he just taken a registration in one of the universities for his research work. But after end of the year, when he just totally satisfied with his complete research work, as well as he had a kind of a couple of good papers in very international journals, at the time of submission of the thesis, it was just observed in the administration or in the management side, saying that the authorship byline is mentioning the affiliation of the institute wherein the researcher is working. But one of the mandates of the university to accept the thesis to further review is the publication should be having the affiliation of the university, wherein the student was just having affiliation to another research institute. Because of that one particular point, again, he was just made to just publish again publications. You can just imagine the kind of a pain the researcher might have gone in that particular phase, wherein after 5 years complete 5 years of doing the research and also completing his entire research project with the proper results. And only at this point of time, the university management or administration is just denying the acceptance of the research, only with the reason like the research articles are having a affiliation of other institute, not the university wherein he has registered. It is a kind of a very what you can say uh, painful state of that particular researcher, wherein again he has to just uh, publish again one or two publications out of that particular research. In the sense, it's again going to be a kind of a task, very difficult task for any person for that matter. So such kind of situations also happen. So whether it is a researcher or a kind of a supervisor or a mentor or an administrator, or even in the senior level as a kind of advisor, so all these elements should be very much be what you can say brief to the researchers before just going ahead for what I can say uh, ahead in the research career. So these are some of the very typical experiences. Of course, these are very bad experiences, but to avoid all these, one should have a thorough understanding and knowledge of each and every bit of the entire research process and research cycle. Whenever any individual is there in the research institute for their studies. So to summarize the entire this thing presentation, I would summarize in like stakeholders in research, investigators and research associates, collaborators, reviewers and editors have a very high responsibilities and obligations towards the proper conduct and publication of research. Open access models have boosted the dissemination of research to a mass, but simultaneously they pose the dangerous challenges. So, and also there is an urgency to frame uniform article processing charges across the world, because uh, with my observation, I just see the publishing bodies are charging very heavily for publishing the articles in the open access platforms. So whether it is a totally open access journal or whether it is a hybrid journal, the article processing charges are very high. There is an urgency to frame a kind of a uniform article processing charges across the world. So these are some of the what you can say observations I just can make out of this entire presentation. So with this, I thank the authorities at VTU as well as the organizers, Lisa uh, Academy, Liz Academy Bangalore, for giving me this opportunity